Hello, this is the video, the 2.08 lesson, The Great War. This is going to be about World War I. At the turn of the 20th century, Europeans lived on the edge of war. In 1914, a political assassination in the Balkans brought the tense, uneasy peace to an end. Safely across the Atlantic, Woodrow Wilson called on Americans to maintain the country's long tradition of isolationism and neutrality. But newfound economic power and interest in international trade and politics pushed the nation onto the world stage and into war. As European countries suffered terrible losses in the unending carnage of a military stalemate, the United States chose sides and called on its vast human and material resources to make the difference over there. Goals for this lesson: explain the reasons for U.S. neutrality at the start of the Great War, recognize events that led to the U.S. entry in the Great War on the Allied side, and list examples of the expansion of the federal government during World War I. And I hope you were able to look at the pictures as they're going through the slides here. One was the Archduke and Archduchess that were assassinated here, and then the other pictures were of the industrial push during the war, and then here's also the sinking of Lusitania, which you're going to read about in the lesson. Remember to go to lesson resources, you grab your reading guide and lesson answer key, and there's also this over there sheet that we're going to fill out too, so grab that as well. We're going to read pages 624 to 623, reading guide, over there sheet, and continue to work on your research project. So let's go to the reading on page 624. And this is the beginning of the chapter showing troops over in Europe during World War I. The First World War and its aftermath. In 1914, the continent of Europe exploded into a terrible conflict, now called World War I, to distinguish it from a second catastrophic war that occurred later in the 20th century. Of course, in 1914, no one could foresee future conflicts. They called the disastrous war that raged from 1914 to 1918 the Great War. Safely across the Atlantic, the United States at first tried to remain apart from the Great War. But as the war escalated, the country found it hard to avoid a conflict that was spreading to engulf much of the world. America's extensive trade with Britain and France and its cultural ties to those nations ultimately made neutrality impossible. In 1917, the United States entered the war on the side of Britain and France against their enemy Germany. While Americans' involvement in the war was relatively brief, the experience would profoundly reshape American society. The roots of the conflict. And this is important to understand. It's a very complex system of alliances that were going on in Europe at the time that ultimately led to the Great War, World War I. What led the great powers of Europe, and ultimately the United States as well, to engage and persist in a war that brought unprecedented destruction and loss of life? The roots of the conflict are long and tangled. Military buildup and fragile alliances. At the beginning of the 20th century, Europe lived in a state of tense, uneasy peace. The continent's great powers, Britain, France, and Germany and Russia, competed fiercely to expand their empires in Africa and Asia. Closer to home, they built up powerful military forces in order to intimidate their neighbors. The German government embarked on a vast shipbuilding program designed to challenge the British Navy's dominance of the seas. France built up its land forces in response to the growing might of the German army. For more than 4 decades, as Europe and industrialized nations built their armies and weapons, they managed to stay at peace with each other. In part, they avoided war through a tense and fragile system of military alliances. Nations entered into agreements with other nations in which they said, in effect, if your enemies attack you, we will come to your aid. And if we are attacked, you will come to our aid. So basically, we got your back, you got our back. Through such alliances, the European powers hoped to protect themselves and discourage each other from launching a major war. As early as 1879, Germany made an alliance with what was then called Austria-Hungary. In 1882, Italy joined them in a pact known as the Triple Alliance. The French were alarmed by neighboring Germany's military buildup and the formation of the Triple Alliance. So France entered into alliance with Russia. The two nations agreed to help each other if attacked by Germany. Britain, troubled by the growing strength of the German Navy, decided to seek potential allies. In 1907, Britain, France, and Russia entered into an agreement called the Triple to support each other. The agreement was called the Triple Entente. Entente is French for understanding. So we have the Triple Alliance and the Triple Entente. By the early 20th century, then, the great powers of Europe were divided into two camps, the Triple Alliance and the Triple Entente. For the time being, these alliances helped maintain a fragile peace, but they also ensured that if any member nation decided to fight against each other, most of Europe would be engulfed in war. The powder keg of Europe. And just look at the picture here. The assassination of Franz Ferdinand and his wife was the spark that ignited the powder keg of Europe. In the southeastern corner of Europe, between Austria and Greece, lay the Balkan Peninsula. This region was home to a number of small nations, including Serbia, Croatia, and Bosnia-Herzegovina, Albania, and Bulgaria. For centuries, most of the area had been ruled by the Ottoman Empire, an Islamic empire whose center was Turkey. During the 16th and 17th centuries, the Ottoman Empire was one of the most powerful empires in the world. But in the late 19th century, as European nations industrialized and grew strong, the Ottoman Empire rapidly declined, and the people of the area struggled to assert their independence. Okay, before we go any farther in the reading, I just wanted to show you this map here. So you can kind of visualize what we're talking about when we're talking about these countries and the Triple Entente, the Triple Alliance. So the Triple Entente, we have Britain here, the United Kingdom, France, Russia, and then the Triple Alliance, which would later be called the Central Powers. We have Germany, Austria, Hungary, and then the Ottoman Empire over here, which is the Turkey. Bulgaria later joined, and this is what the area that we're talking about, the powder keg of Europe. This is, of course, as you're into the war, so the colors also show the neutral countries as well, but this is the area that we're talking about, so you have a better visualization of it. Okay, so I was on the second paragraph. Some of the Balkan states, like Serbia, did win their freedom. But after the decline of the Ottoman dominance, another empire, Austria-Hungary, sought to control the region. The Serbs were enraged when in 1878 Austria-Hungary occupied the neighboring country of Bosnia-Herzegovina. At the same time, many Bosnians, who like the Serbs, belonged to the ethnic group known as Slavs, wanted to break free from Austria-Hungary and join the Serbs in a larger Slavic state. So a lot of ethnic tensions as well. So we're once again seeing that visualization of the land area we're talking about. Simmering tensions in the Balkans coined the term, earned the region the nickname the powder keg of Europe. Germany's leader Otto von Bismarck predicted that if a major war erupted on the continent, it would be some damn thing in the Balkans that set it off. And it was. The powder keg explodes. Bismarck's prediction came true on June 28, 1914. On that day, the Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the throne of Austria-Hungary, was visiting Sarajevo, the capital of Bosnia. As Franz Ferdinand and his wife Sophie rode through the city in an open car, a young Bosnian nationalist rushed forward, pistol in hand, and killed them both. Austrian officials believed correctly that Serbians had been involved in the plot to murder the Archduke. The Austrians declared war on Serbia. To the Austrian emperor, the assassination provided a compelling reason to crush Serbia and end the Slavic independence movement. But the giant empire of Russia, home to many Slavic peoples, considered itself the protector of all Slavs. Though Russia's leader, Tsar Nicholas II, tried to avoid getting into war, his efforts could not prevent the catastrophe. Russia mobilized its army to defend the Serbs. The system of alliances that the Europeans had counted on to maintain peace now tumbled the great powers into conflict. By early August in 1914, Europe had plunged into war. On one side were Germany and Austria-Hungary. Italy, which had been part of the Triple Alliance, decided to remain neutral. On the other side were Britain, France, and Russia. The First World War had begun. So let's look at our picture here again. Two large countries, Germany, Austria-Hungary, against France, Russia, Great Britain over here. All right. The waves of patriotic feeling swept through the nations on both sides. When a train full of French troops left a station in Paris, thousands of people saw them off, roaring the French national anthem and waving handkerchiefs and hats. In the respective capitals, the Kaiser of Germany and the Tsar of Russia appeared before ecstatic crowds, invoking God's aid in the coming battles. A young German soldier named Adolf Hitler thanked heaven for having been permitted to live in such times. Each side was confident of a superior military strength. Both sides expected a short war. "You'll be home by Christmas," civilians assured troops on their way to the front. In fact, the conflict went on for 4 horrendous years. In the first months, the German army drove through Belgium and invaded northern France. Then the war settled into a bloody stalemate with the opposing armies hunkered down in a huge system of trenches stretching from Holland to Switzerland, peering at each other across the desolate stretches of bombed out landscape known as No Man's Land. New military technology, including long range rifles, improved machine guns, massive artillery pieces, and poison gas, made World War I the deadliest war in history up to that time. Total war. Oh, just before we go there, let's look at this. The soldier advances with a gas mask, an apparatus to protect against a new weapon of warfare, poison gas. And then you can also see these circles, that's barbed wire. Barbed wire is what was put between the trenches in no man's land to try to keep people from crossing over. So you have like a trench here and a trench there and no man's land in the middle with barbed wire and other traps set up in there. And trying to cross over from one side to the other was what made it kind of a stalemate because nobody really could ever cross over to conquer more land. As the war expanded, more nations were drawn into the conflict. On one side were the Allied powers, whose principal members included Great Britain, Belgium, France, Russia, and Italy. The alliances were opposed by the Central Powers, the alliance formed by Germany, Austria-Hungary, and eventually the Ottoman Empire. The Allies enlisted not just their own citizens on the home front, but many people from their dominions and colonies as well. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers from the British dominions of Australia, Canada, Ireland, and New Zealand joined the fight, as did soldiers from the British and French colonies of India and North Africa. The conflict, mostly European at first, grew into a true world war. In 1914, most Europeans had expected a short war with few casualties. By 1916, leaders on both sides refused to seek a truce even in the face of nightmarish death and destruction. World War I escalated into the first total war, a war in which the opposed nations used virtually every resource they possessed to keep up the fight, involving every citizen in the effort. European governments took charge of many aspects of their nation's economies. They devoted entire industries, steel, rubber, munitions, to war production. Government leaders in Britain, France, and Germany brought union leaders and businessmen into the planning. Soon government agencies of both the Allied and Central Powers were setting prices, determining wages, rationing food, and deciding which industries would get what resources. Planned economies largely organized and controlled by the government, temporarily replaced free market capitalism in Europe. The United States enters the war. Even as the war ground on, one major nation, the United States, remained neutral. That neutrality stemmed in part from isolationism, the long-standing belief that America should stand apart from the old world's many quarrels. It stemmed, too, from America's divided sympathies. A large proportion of Americans took the side of the Allies because they felt a deep cultural kinship with Britain, or remembered the essential contribution that France had made to the American Revolution. But among the nation's 10 million German Americans and among the millions of recent immigrants from Central and Eastern Europe, many favored the Central Powers. And I'm going to stop here because we're almost to our 15-minute time limit and I won't be able to finish the next section in that time. So we'll stop here and begin on the next video right on the strains of neutrality.